What's going on? It's Cooper Codes, and in this video we're building this full stack Next.js, Supabase, and TypeScript website that allows users to build and share articles. This tutorial is intended for people who are just getting into kind of intermediate program or want to learn how to use Supabase in a full stack environment. We build a full authentication system with Supabase where we can log in. For example, I already created an account with Cooper Codes 2 at Gmail so I can sign in like this. We'll then get sent to the main feed where we can see all the different articles. For example, if I want to go to Cooper Codes 3, I can read this article here, and you'll see we are looking at an article with a particular ID, and we're getting all the information just like you'd expect from a full stack project. We can go back to the main feed, and we can also take a look at the article that we own. For example, I'm logged in as Cooper Codes 2 at Gmail, so I can go over to this article about why you should subscribe to Cooper Codes, and as you guys will see, there are actually extra buttons that allow us to manage this article because we own it. For example, I can edit the article, and I'll add something to the article like, "Thanks for clicking on this video." And then I can update the article here. We'll go back and we'll see we have the fully updated article, and that is updating in our PostgreSQL backend where we create a table to hold these articles. We can also delete articles, so we can see that if I want this article to go away, I can press delete here, and boom, we have no more article. And let's say we want to make an article again, we can go up, create an article here. It shows who we're posting as, so pretty much who we're currently signed in as. Gonna make the title, "Let's Get Started" with the tutorial, and the article text is hopefully you guys learn a bunch from this video. So we can create this article, and you'll see it's going to show in the main feed here. So this is the main idea of what this project is going to do. It's relatively simple. As you guys see, the article is just one block of text, and the UI isn't the craziest you've ever seen, but this tutorial should get you super familiar with managing data in a full stack environment using Next.js, TypeScript, and Supabase. Let's get into it. We can get started by going to an empty folder and opening up Visual Studio Code or just a terminal in that empty folder. Then we can create our next application by saying npx create-next-app at latest. And because we are going to be using TypeScript for this project, we want to say --ts. That's going to build everything in a TypeScript fashion. This will then ask you for the project name. I'm just going to call this medium-clone. So you guys will see we have our full next application that got generated. Let's go back to the terminal and cd into the medium clone folder. From here, we can install all the different packages we're going to need for this project. For the user interface, we are going to be using NextUI. So I'm going to say npm install @nextui-org/react. We can then npm install all the different Supabase helpers we are going to need for both authorization and using the Supabase client for database operations like creating articles. So we can npm install @supabase/auth-helpers-next.js. We're also going to install @supabase/auth-helpers-react. I know it's kind of weird to see some React helpers inside of a Next.js project, but some stuff is only in the helpers React repo, so we're going to need to get that functionality from there, which I'll explain as we use that functionality. And then finally, we need @supabase/auth-ui-react. So these are the three libraries we are going to need, so you can press enter. And so if you want to double check, you can go over to your package.json and it should look something just like this. All right, so this is great news. That's all the npm installs we have to do. So let's get started by going into the pages folder, and then we're going to want to create an _document.tsx. This allows us to customize the document that gets rendered, and it's necessary for NextUI to work. So I'm going to copy paste some code in here that I'm going to put in the description. Rarely in these tutorials will you ever see me copy pasting code, but this is just some boilerplate stuff we need. So the CSS baseline from NextUI right here gets imported correctly, and so we can use NextUI throughout our Next.js project. So there's going to be a paste bin in the description. I'll mark it with something like _document, copy paste that code and bring it over to your _document.tsx here and make sure to save it. We are then also going to want to go to _app.tsx. Within our _app, we want to render everything that needs to be around our application. You can think about things such as providers, for example, providing Supabase to our application, and also providing UI to our application, so NextUI providers as well. This is because everything within our application is going to need access to Supabase or NextUI is an assumption we make here. We also want a consistent navbar to show throughout our application, so we can put the navbar here as well, which is something that we are going to create in a second. But for now, we can get started by initializing Supabase. We can start by importing a constructor called createBrowserSupabase client, and that's going to come from @supabase/auth auth-helpers-next.js. This allows us to create a Supabase client that we can use throughout our next application. We can copy this import and then bring it to another line because we're going to get some similar syntax here. We're going to import session context provider, and that's going to come from the React library. So auth-helpers-react. We are also going to use a simple use state from React, which is going to allow us to hold our Supabase client within a React state, which I'll show you guys in a second. So initializing a Supabase client in your next application is actually really simple. You can start by using a use state, which is just something that allows us to hold a variable within React or Next.js. We can set it equal to an arrow function. What this arrow function is doing is it allows us to call a constructor if we want to, construct something and then put it in the state. So we can say create browser Supabase client. This is going to create a full Supabase client and then store it within this state. If we want to get that stored variable, we can save it into a variable such as const Supabase client is equal to this use state. So this is great. This means our client is fully initialized, but our actual application doesn't have access to it yet. What we can do is we can make this return statement multiple lines by adding some curly braces here or some parentheses. And then we can initialize our session context provider. This allows our entire Next application to constantly see the Supabase session we initialized right at line 11. The session context provider takes in a super important property, which is the Supabase client property. This allows our provider to show a certain client, for example, the one we just generated at line 11, to our entire application. I'll show you guys in more detail later, but as we use the Supabase client throughout our application, it's going to be referencing this client we created at line 11. So you might be asking an important question. How does this Supabase at line 11 know who you are? For example, how does it know your Supabase URL or your Supabase anon key, for example? Well, first we have to go over to Supabase and create our account. So now I'm going to create a Supabase account. So let's get into that. So let's go over to supabase.com and sign in. You guys should be brought to your dashboard. For example, I have some stuff from previous videos. Let's go and create a new project and choose your own organization. I'm going to name this Supabase Medium Clone. And then this database password is incredibly important. So make sure to generate a password here or use whatever you like, and then copy it and save it. I'm pretty sure Supabase doesn't allow you to look at this password again, so make sure to copy it and save it somewhere safe. Just for emphasis, I'm going to use a notepad here, and I'm going to say database password is equal to this thing right here. Besides that, choose the region closest to you, and then create your project. So Supabase might take some time to actually get set up, but two very important things you need to copy are the anon public key, so it's going to be this key at the very top here, so make sure to copy this, anon public over here. It's going to be very long. And then the URL. This URL is actually how you manage your database and just manage Supabase in general is with this URL right here. So copy this, just the URL is equal to this. One quick note, once your Supabase project gets fully initialized by Supabase, you're going to be seeing a different page than what I copied those variables from before. To get your anon public key and also your URL, you're going to go to this page, which is your main project page. Scroll down and you'll see that your URL is going to be right here and your API key is going to be right here. Let's go back to our next project and get all of our variables initialized to use Supabase. So you want to go to the outermost folder of your project. So for example, the medium-clone project, and I want to make a new file. This is going to be called .env for environment variables and then .local. So specifically our local environment variables. When Supabase gets initialized, it will look into .env.local for all the variables that it needs. For example, we can start variables by saying next_public_, and then you have to spell it just this way because this is what Supabase expects, is Supabase_URL is equal to, we can take that URL that we got from before, and we can just copy this line for simplicity. We are going to have two more variables. The next one's going to be Supabase_anon_key, so your anonymous key. We can copy it from our notepad here. And then we want the database_password like this, which is going to be this password right here. So bring it over to the string. And so if we go back to this _app.tsx, which we were just working in, when we call this create browser Supabase client, what's going to happen is it's using the .env.local parameters in the background. And so just to clear up any confusion, even though we're not specifically calling these env.local variables, they're incredibly necessary because this function right here needs the variables to exist. But now what it's doing is it's creating our Supabase client with these variables. So it's going to be specific to whatever information you provided to it. So pretty much Supabase is going to work with your actual account that you made on Supabase. And so that's all we need to do to initialize Supabase. I know it's kind of tedious in a lot of different steps, but getting Supabase initialized in your application is incredibly important. Now we can do something that's a little bit more lightweight, easier, is we are going to import the NextUI provider from @nextui-org/react. And so the order of these providers doesn't really matter in our case, but I'm going to put this NextUI provider within the Supabase one, just like this. And so this gives our app access to anything it's going to need from NextUI, for example. All right, so now we are going to create two different components for our next application. The first one is the navbar, which I kind of already said up there, but we'll just say this again. We're going to make the navbar, and then we're also going to create a box component for the content of our website to live in. You can imagine this is like a container for the content that we want to be standardized from each page. This just makes our lives simpler, so we don't have to do like different container styling for each page of our application, for example. So we're going to go outside of pages, go to medium clone here, and we are going to make a components folder. We can get started with the box because it's going to be relatively simple compared to the navbar. Because in the navbar, we're actually going to get into authentication. So we can go open up the components here and add a component and call it box.tsx. And so we are going to use something called styled, so we can import styled from @nextui-org/react. This allows us to make a div, for example, with a certain styling. You could imagine the content of each web page is going to be held within this styled div from NextUI. So we can export const this box element is equal to styled, which is a constructor. It's going to style something. So it's like, what do we want to style? We want to style the div. What styling do we want that div to have by default? We are going to use something called box sizing is equal to border-box. This isn't really a CSS tutorial or anything, but this is just a very simple way to get nice looking boxes on every single web page. And it allows us to make a div we can further customize. So let's go back to _app.tsx and do that. So we can now go and import this box component that we just made from .. So go back one folder, go into components, and then go into box is how that styling works there. And it's not a default export, so we have to have these curly braces around it. And now we have access to a box that we can wrap around our component, or the page we're currently on is another way to think about component. And so box is a div. And so the interesting thing about styled, which guys don't worry about too much, is that we can treat box like a div and give it properties like a div from NextUI. And so I'm going to add a bunch of CSS to this box because this is a very important part of our application and we want it to look nice. And so I'll do my best to explain every single CSS property that we're adding here. Even though this isn't like a super CSS tutorial, this is just to make everything look good. We can start by saying px, so that is padding in the x direction. If you could think like an XY axis, so padding in the x direction. We can say $12, and I'm going to have a bunch of different variables that have a $sign. This $sign means it's a variable 12 designated by NextUI is where this $12s come from, is $12 represents a certain length specifically from NextUI. So we can say padding in the Y direction is equal to $15 is something I found looks pretty nice. And we can do a little margin top. And so this margin top is going to make it so our pages aren't directly aligned to the navbar. We want a little bit of space between our page or the actual content of the site from the navbar. So we can add a little bit of space by saying $12. Then we can do something called @XS max. This is pretty much saying the max properties for certain properties on the extra small setting of our screen. For example, we can set, I want the max padding in the X direction to ever be $10 on the extra small screen. And to make this box a little bit more like a column, I'm going to say max width is equal to 800 pixels. So this means if we're on a super large screen, for example, it doesn't make our articles super long, because since we're reading text, we want the text to be relatively readable. So we're going to keep it to a smaller column. And then to align our content to the center of the page, we are going to say margin is equal to 0 auto, which is a classic way to get the box aligned to the center of the screen. I know that's a bunch of CSS properties, so thanks for staying with me, guys. But now we have a box that's going to hold the actual content of whatever page we're on, which is great news. And so we now want a navbar to show on the top of every single page. And so I'm going to keep a little comment here saying that we want this navbar to be above the content. You could imagine we have the navbar here, and then this component represents a certain article that we're looking at, for example. And so we always want the navbar on top of the article or the navbar on top of the main feed, for example. And so let's get started with creating this navbar. We are again going to go into components and we are going to go and create a navbar component.tsx. All right, guys, so now we can make the navbar component. So I'm just going to make this a simple const functional component by saying navbar component at the bottom here. Going to make it equal to an arrow function that takes no properties is pretty much what this empty parentheses means. And we can just return nothing. Will this stop yelling at us? No, we actually got to make something. Then at the bottom, we can export default navbar component. So this line allows our navbar component to be used throughout our next application. So I'm just going to return a little fragment here so we get rid of the errors, because before we do any styling, I'm going to show you guys how we can use the Supabase client and the user inside of our navbar. So I'm going to import two important things here. Firstly, I'm going to say import use user, and then also use Supabase client. These are called React hooks, and these hooks give us access to the user and also the Supabase client. And so whatever component you're using, you can use these hooks to gain access to that information. And so they're going to come from the @supabase/auth-helpers-react. And so if I want access to the Supabase client, I can say const Supabase client is equal to use Supabase client. And yes, it seems crazy, but it really is that easy. And if I want access to the user, I can go on top of any component and say const user is equal to use user. I also need another hook for our navbar, which is going to be the next router. So I can say import use router from next/router. Use router, my bad. And so we can define the router by saying const router is equal to use router at the top of our component here. And so that is how we can use Supabase throughout our components. Let's get started by importing some things to actually create the structure of our navbar. For example, we can import the navbar, the button, and the text are three ones we're going to use from @nextui-org/react. These are all a bunch of pre-made components that we can use to make our lives easier when designing the components. And then this is the last import, so thanks for staying with me, guys. We can import the link from next/link. So we can start by wrapping our entire component in a large, just generic navbar like this. And I want the navbar to be isBordered, which is a property that gets defined by NextUI. So we can add a border to our navbar, also isCompact, which gives us access to some compact styling. Within here, we can do a bunch of different things related to the navbar. For example, the navbar.brand is the kind of main title that you see to the left of the navbar. For example, it's going to be share articles in our case. And this brand is going to be as a link component. And using this link component, we can attach an href, which is going to send it to a certain link. For example, just regular slash. So this is going to take us to the home page of our application. We can now establish some content that's going to sit in the middle of our navbar. For example, by using navbar.content. I'm going to hide this content when we go to an extra small screen, and we can also make this content have a variant. For example, we can highlight -rounded is a variant I found that looks nice. And you can test a bunch of different variants out and stylings for whatever you like the most. Within this content, we can store navbar.links like this. For example, we can have a link to the main feed, which we can pass an href to, which is going to send us to the /mainFeed like this. We can also do a link to the createArticle, which we can pass to the link of /createArticle. We can then have another navbar.content, and this is going to store all the content that is going to hold our user logic. And so in Next.js, we can use something called conditional rendering to show certain pieces of data if the user exists. Pay attention, because this is super important for using Supabase authentication in your apps. Is a very common thing you can do is you can say !user. And so what this is saying is if the user doesn't exist, it's going to be !false, right? So, or like some type of like empty value, which is going to get registered as false. And so this is going to eventually become true. So if the user doesn't exist, what do you want to show to your application is what this !user is saying. And so we can even do something like this, user doesn't exist. What do we want to show? And then we can do a colon, and this is a ternary statement is what I'm using with this question mark and the colon. And down here with this colon, we can say that the user does exist. And so you can pretty much render two different things in your application, which is pretty neat. For example, if a user doesn't exist, we are going to show a navbar.link It's going to have an href pointing to the /login route. Within the link, we're going to have a button, which is going to be styled with the auto and also flat, which are two properties from NextUI that allow us to make a cool looking button. And it's going to say login. So this is a button that allows the user to press on it and then they'll get sent to the login path. But if a user does exist, we can do something like this. We can say, okay, let's take a navbar.item, for example, and I want to make some text that says hello to the current user. It's going to say, hey, and then I can even use variables that come from the user object. We'll get more into what the actual user object contains later, but just know that it contains an email. So you can say user?email. This is just in case the user doesn't use an email or there's no email attached to the account. For simplicity, this video is only going to have email logins, but this question mark makes it so let's say user is null, for example. It's not going to try and say like null.email or undefined.email because that could toss an error. And so this question mark is common syntax for saving us from that error where if we try and get .email out of undefined, it's going to give us an error, right? And then we can also use another navbar.item. And now we can instead show a button, which is going to sign out the user. Instead of just sending them to like an href route of like /signout, like think about it logically. Have you ever been sent to a sign out page on a website before? Probably not. It would just sign you out. And so what we're going to do instead is first of all, we're going to have the auto and the flat to keep that same styling. And then we can use the onPress, which handles the event when the user presses on the button. We can use an arrow function within here to call more logic. For example, sign out user, which is a function that we can just go make. So when we press on the sign out button, it's going to call this sign out user function. So we can go to the top of this component and define the function like this. Function sign out user. And Supabase makes this painfully easy to do. If we have a user currently signed in and we want to sign them out, we can go to the Supabase client. Then we can specifically ask for the auth related things in our client, and then we can call the .signout function that Supabase gives us. After the user has been signed out, we can also push them to, let's say, the main page, for example. So just to the /. And if you're curious about what this / means, because it kind of is in this href as well, you see it a lot. / just means that they're going to be sent to localhost 3000 / or just localhost 3000. And that's all the logic we are going to need for pushing them to that route. And so this is our full navbar component, which is super impressive. One thing is our localhost 3000 is still showing the default generic Next.js website. So we can go over to where that logic is defined in pages, then index.tsx. As you'll see, index.tsx at the very top of pages is pretty much the localhost 3000 page. That's how you guys should think about it. It's the base root of your application. So what we can do is we can get rid of all this boilerplate code. We don't need any of this. And I'm just going to make a very, very simple page for our home to look at. So I'm going to use this React fragment here just to hold the little components we're going to create. And these are going to get imported from the NextUI library. So I'm going to make some curly braces from @nextui.org/react. And we're going to need access to the text and the spacer. This is going to be a painfully simple landing page. So this is like the landing page of your website. I'm making this intentionally very simple just to make the tutorial simple, but I'm going to make a text element at the top that's going to say the future of article sharing. Are we actually making the future of article sharing here? You know what? I say we are. So let's keep it going. We can make a spacer in between. This pretty much allows you to add space between different components and allows you to say how much space you want in different axes. For example, in the y-axis, I want 1 unit of space. And these units of space are just defined by NextUI. I also want some text, which you can set equal to the $large property by setting the size here. And we can say something like share articles. So the name of our fake website here allows you to create and share articles, if that wasn't already obvious enough. All right, so if we go to localhost 3000, we are going to see this very basic piece of text, but we want the navbar to show on top of every single page. How we can do that is let's go over to our _app.tsx. And as you guys will see, look, this comment at line 24 is going to do us good because this is exactly where we want our navbar. And because we did a default export, we can go up here and say import navbar component from this navbar component. We can also just call it navbar just to show you guys something else you can do with default exports is you can name it whatever you want. It's just going to put the export of this component into this variable name. So we can just use navbar like this. And then we can put the navbar right here where we want it to be by putting the component in like this. and just closing it right away. All right, so now we are going to have a website that has this navbar that we just made, and it's also going to have the component of the website in the bottom here. So let's start our application and see everything. All right, so as you guys can see, there is some strange styling going on here. I already know what this is, but just to explain some problem solving, we have this navbar which looks suspiciously good. It doesn't look like there are any external styles being applied to the navbar here, but the pages seem to be impacted by this external styling. This is because the Next.js default styling is still being applied to every single page. So we can change that by going to _app.tsx and seeing, if we scroll up here, that at the very top, we have this globals.css that's being imported. We do not want these global CSS properties from the default Next app, so we can delete it here like this. Boom, there we go. So now we have access to this page, which obviously, if you want to make a more advanced landing page, go for it. But for this website, we're just gonna have this very simple landing page for the users to see. Now we can get started by creating the authorization processes for this full stack website. You'll see if we go to login right now, we are going to go to a page that could not be found. So we are going to create the page for this /login route. Next.js makes it surprisingly simple to make pages to certain routes. We can just open up pages, and if we want to go to localhost 3000 /login, we can go and say new folder inside of pages and name it login. When we load the /login route, it's going to look at the index.tsx of the certain route we're looking at. So within this index.tsx is where we define what do we see when we go to /login. And so we can create the login page by saying const login is of type next page. And so this is where the typing of the actual page comes into play. For example, we want to import next page to our application, which we can just do by saying import type next page from next. And this is going to be common among all the different pages we're creating for this tutorial. And because we're not using properties, which I'll show in a different component, we are just going to have a simple arrow function like this to define our login route. We can then export default. We can then export default login on the bottom. And to make our lives easier, I recommend you guys go over to your navbar component real quick, grab these imports from the top of the use user, use Supabase client, and also use router, grab these, Control-C, and then bring them over to your login page. Then again, you can go over to navbar component and then grab all these consts that we define above the component like this, and then also paste those into your login page. This allows us to use all the different functionality here within our login. Whether that's Supabase, user, router, we can use it all now, which is great. And then to make a auth component in a relatively short period of time is we can use the pre-built component given to us by Supabase. So we can import that auth pre-built component, and we can also import a theme if we want to use it, such as theme supa. This is going to be from @supabase /authui-react. One cool piece of logic we can add to this page is that let's say a user loads this page, but they're already logged in. We don't want them to be confused and try and log in twice or think they weren't logged in. Like, why are you allowed to go to the login page? So one cool thing we can do is we can say, if the user does exist, we can then router.push to the /mainFeed. So this pretty much says, get out of the login page. We are going to shove you over to the main feed instead. We can then return the actual component we plan to show in our application here. For example, I'm going to make the auth component, which is just defined like this. It's going to have an appearance of theme is equal to theme supa. And then incredibly importantly, this auth needs to say which Supabase client are we using to log in and authenticate our users. We can say Supabase client is equal to the Supabase client that we have at line 7. I know this is pretty wild for a whole login page, but that's it. That's all we need to do. What's going to happen is this auth component fully manages the signups, the logins, and everything like that. And as soon as a user gets logged in from this auth component, we are going to shove them over to /mainFeed. So let's go and log in our first user. We can go to the login page by pressing the login here, and you're going to see it's going to give us that pre-made component. So we can go to the bottom of this component and say don't have an account, sign up. We can then create an account by entering the email address and then creating a password. You should see, check your email for the confirmation link. I'm using a test email here, and you guys will see Supabase even sends users emails to sign up. So I can then confirm right here, and boom, it's going to send me to my, localhost 3000 here, which is pretty neat. You can change this redirect link that comes directly from the email, because I talked about being redirected to mainFeed earlier, but if you go directly from the email, it's going to send you to the landing page. You can change how this redirects, but I'm not going to get into that in this video. Just look up Supabase auth redirect, and you should see some good materials if you want to do that. But look at this, amazing thing is it actually recognizes that the user, remember this coopercodes2 at Gmail right here is coming from the user object from Supabase. So that means we have a user authenticated with Supabase, and we can even log them out if we wanted, for example. And so just to test our functionality, I suppose we can sign out this person. All right, we're signed out. We can then log in, and I will say before I press a sign in, we are going to get redirected to mainFeed. And when we get redirected, it's going to be a 404 because we haven't created the mainFeed page yet, right? So let's sign in, and boom, we got redirected to mainFeed, which is great, but it's a 404. We haven't made this page yet, which is absolutely fine. But pat yourself on the back, guys. We now have a Next.js and TypeScript application with full stack Supabase authentication, which is awesome. So now that we have users, we know we can log these users in. We need to go and create the PostgreSQL table for our articles. If you guys are unfamiliar with SQL, do not worry. It's actually a really simple table, and it's actually a great introduction to understanding SQL. So you want to go to the main dashboard of your project, and then you want to go to the left and press on this SQL editor. From here, we want to go and press the top left and say new query. I'm going to zoom in for you guys here. I don't know why it's so small on Supabase's side, but here we go. We can get started with our query by creating a table. And so this is a table that allows us to store data. And we can name this specific table articles. Don't be super concerned about the syntax, but I'm going to explain what each line is doing just so you guys know what's up. We can make an ID, which is going to be a big int, which is like an integer, but it stores more, surprise, and is generated by default as, which means we want to show it as the identity primary key. And so the primary key is how we can identify a certain article is with this ID right here. We also want to attach the user ID for who actually created a certain article. So we can store this by user underscore ID is a UUID, which is going to send a reference. So you're going to say references to auth.users. And you want it to be not null. So there always has to be a user ID attached to an article. And again, I'm explaining this kind of simply. This isn't exactly an SQL tutorial, but it should get you guys started with me just talking about it like this. Those are going to be the more complicated ones. Now you get to super simple SQL types. For example, the title of the article, which is going to be a text. The content of the article is going to be text. I'm also going to attach the user underscore email to the article, which is going to be text again. And then I'm also going to keep an inserted underscore at. This was shown in documentation, so I think it was great to show. And we're also going to use this as like the date for when it was created. And so we can say timestamp with the time zone default as the time zone of UTC converted to text of the current date, which is now. And then make sure to have a semicolon after the end of this create table articles. And then we want to say not null. So there should always be an inserted at is what the not null means. And so now we are going to get into something called row level security. With row level security, we can say at a certain row, what is the user who is authorized allowed to access? So this is a combination of both PostgreSQL and also what Supabase allows us to access. And so we can say, take this current table, we can say alter table articles, so make sure it's the same name, enable row level security. This allows us to have certain operations be protected. For example, if I want to create an article, I have to be a user. So I can say create policy, and we can name the policy called users can create articles on the articles table for insert with check. So we're checking for a certain thing that the auth, this is where Supabase comes into plays with this auth here. The .uid, so the UUID pretty much of the user is equal to the user underscore ID that is stored in the table, which is going to be that user underscore ID at line 3. So users can create articles. Pretty much if you want to insert into articles, you have to be a user is what this line is saying here. Then we can copy this policy like this because we're going to make a similar one called users can update their own articles. And so this check is actually happening after the fact that, once the user is done, they are the user that created the article, if that makes sense. They have to have a UID to create the article in the end. But if you want a kind of real-time thing to happen, you have to say insert, or for example, update using this same pattern here, that the UID is equal to the user underscore ID. So in order to make an update, they have to be the user that owns it, is a way to think about this. And the same thing happens here. In order to create a deletion instead, so users can delete their own articles. In order to trigger a delete event, they have to be the user who owns it. So the exact same logic applies. And then you can think about, okay, we want people to look at any article. And so it doesn't even matter if you're a user or if you're logged in. We want the things in the articles table to be accessible by anyone. So you could even not be logged in and still look at an article, for example. We can create that policy by saying that articles are public. And then again, it's going to be on the articles table. It's going to be for when we select data, we want it to be using the policy of just true. So there's pretty much no policy. It's saying that we want it to be true no matter what. If we try to grab data from articles, yes, you can have it 100% of the time. You can always get articles data. And then, so sorry guys, you have to go at the end of all these different checks and make sure to put a semicolon. Incredibly important. So semicolon at the end of this one, at line 13, semicolon here, and semicolon there. If you guys got lost or it's not quite working at any part of this process, creating this table, because we're just going to run this and then we're done, I'm going to have this in the description, so feel free to take a look at it when you need to. And then to run this operation on our PostgreSQL, we can go to the bottom right here and press run. So you'll see we had a successful run. This is great news. And so if we go to our left and we go to the tables, and we're kind of saying goodbye to this code, we're never going to see it again. We're going to go to the tables now, go to table editor. We will have one table that we just created. So take a look here, go to all tables, go to articles, and boom, I'm going to zoom back out and we can see all the different things that we would expect from this table. We have the inserted at, we have the email, the content, the title, and the user ID, and also the ID, which is being that primary key to this certain row. Hopefully you guys learned a little bit about SQL. That's just like a beginner's guide, but now we have a table to store articles, which is great news. So I think it makes the most logical sense to now get started on making the create article page, because when we create an article in our Next.js app, we can just refresh this table and see the inputted data. So it doesn't really make sense to make the main feed or anything like that quite yet because we have no articles to show. So we can go into pages in our next application. I'm going to create the create article folder. And within here, I'm going to make that index.tsx, which represents the create article route. And so just to make sure I don't lose any of you guys, this create article folder in the index.tsx is what gets served up if the user goes to localhost 3000/create article. So I think it makes most sense. I'm just going to go over to the login. I'm going to Control A, Control C. So copy this whole page and then bring it over to our create article. I'm going to put this comment at the bottom. And so we can change this const login to just be the create article instead, and make sure to also change that login at the bottom to create article. It's just because we are going to need access to Supabase, user, and router again. So I just want to get all the imports and everything out of the way. We're not going to need auth, so I'm just going to make the return statement an empty React fragment for now, and then get rid of auth. So I'm going to style this page first and show you guys what it's going to look like. Then we can add all the functionality for actually creating an article within our PostgreSQL. So I'm going to start at the top by saying import. I want the text. I want the text area, which is like a big rectangle block of input text. I want the grid, and I also want buttons, all from that front-end library using nextui-org/react. Oh, and text area, that second A is lowercase. And make sure to get rid of this if statement on line 13. That's just gonna like shove you to the main feed if the person's ever a user. And we can also use a really cool helper from Next.js. Is when someone goes to create an article, we're kind of making the assumption that they are a user and AKA they can create an article. If they're not a user, they shouldn't be able to go to this page. And so we can make some logic to make this page kind of safe from people that are not logged in. So if you're not logged in, you'll be sent to a different page, for example. We can use the with page auth, which is a helper that comes from import with page auth from @Supabase helpers Next.js. This is helpful because it allows us to use the get server side props in order to enable a kind of redirect of the user. So we can export const get server side props equals with page auth. And so this with page auth recognizes if a user is logged in or not. All the logic is being happened within there. You can even do stuff like see if a user has a certain name in their email or is, using a Gmail account, for example. But when you use it in its most basic format like we have here, we are just going to see if a user doesn't exist, we want to redirect to the /login route. And this is amazing. So if I'm not logged in and I go to the create article route, this with page auth is going to then redirect me to login, which is probably some functionality you're used to seeing when you use, websites that require you to be logged in for certain parts of it. Okay, so we are going to make our lives easier by using something called grid from nextui.org. When using grid, you have to go and make a grid.container, which pretty much means grids can live within this thing. And we can set some styling to the container just to have a gap of 1 so everything isn't super close together. I'm going to start by creating a text of h3, which is going to show the title of the article that the user is expected to input. We can then put a grid here, and I'm going to make it so on the smallest screen, it still takes up the full 12 columns of the grid. So this is taking up the full width of your web page, is this grid. And so this is taking up the full width of the container that this grid's inside. In here, we can then use the text area. For text areas, we have to do a lot of kind of boilerplate, so let's get started. We want this text area's name to be equal to title. We want the aria-label to be equal to title. So that's if someone's like using a screen reader, for example. And honestly, I'm going to make these properties go like this so we don't have a bunch just forever. I'm also going to make the placeholder equal to article title. So this will be that like text that's within the text area. And we can close this up early on here. I also want the full width property to be equal to true. So this text area is going to take up the full width of the container that it's in. I only want 1 row of the text area because you can imagine if you want to be like a big rectangle, you could have like, 10 rows, gonna be 10 rows of text. But because it's just the title for this one, I'm just going to make it 1 row. And I'm going to set the size of the text area equal to XL. And so we can go and check out the /createArticle route right now and see what it looks like so far. And because our navbar has working routes, we can even just go to /createArticle right here. And remember, guys, this is kind of a test. You have to be logged in. If you're not logged in on your website, what's going to happen is you're going to press create article and it's going to redirect you to log in. So make sure to log in, which is kind of cool. The functionality is already working. And so boom, we have it here. I can type my title like, thanks for making it this far. Boom. So there's a title. Obviously nothing else, but just to show you guys what's up so far. I'm then going to copy both the grid and the text. I'm going to make another kind of combo here, but instead I want to show article text. And so I'm going to name everything here content instead of title. So you can imagine the content of the article. I still want full width to be true, and I want the rows to be equal to 6 this time so we can give them some room to write the content of their article. Let's go see what this looks like. Amazing. So we're kind of getting there, guys. Don't get too excited. But now we need a button at the bottom that we can trigger to then, and so I'm actually going to have this say article text because that's what the text says there. But now we want to use a button at the bottom, which we can use to create the article. So I'm going to go to the bottom and say button, create article. Amazing. So now we have a spot where users can go in here and fully create their articles. We can even use that user object to let's make another grid at the very bottom here. And we can make a text element that says, okay, I'm a certain user and I'm posting as user.email. And we should know 100% that the user exists, but I'm just using this question mark syntax just in case. And we're getting access to the user because we did the use user at line 11. So if you missed out on that part, make sure to do that. Amazing. So we have the full code for the create article, and I would argue this looks pretty good. It looks like, some full functionality for our website. Now we need to make the actual article title and the article text save to something in Next.js. And we also need to make it so when you press on the article, it's going to actually create an article. So let's get started by doing a state that is going to save our title and the text of our article. So let's go to the top of the create article route here, and I'm going to say import use state from React. We know that our state, we want to have 2 different properties. In our state, we want to have 2 different properties. So we can save this kind of initial state equal to the title, which is going to be an empty string, and then the content, which is going to be an empty string. We can then make a state using this initial state object here by saying const. I'm going to name it article data and then set article data, which is equal to use state, which is going to get defined initially by this initial state from line 15. This is kind of like some Stack Overflow, weird code. So if I lose you guys, don't worry. This is kind of like some weird code, but it's really an interesting trick to know about React. If you have an input that is let's say a bunch of different things long, let's say you have 10 different things beyond just this title and the content, and you want to save strings to each part of your state, for example, something cool you can do is you can make a generic handle change. So whenever a input gets changed, for example, the user enters new text or the user adjust the title or adjust the content, you can make this handle change. And you can give it access to the event coming from the handle change when a button gets pressed or a text area gets moved, for example. And because we're in TypeScript, I have to make this event equal to an any type. I'm then going to set article data. So as you guys will see, this state right here, set article data. And I'm going to say, okay, take ... all the properties in article data already. So take all the different properties, take the current value of the title, the current value of the content, and then we want to say whatever got changed. We want to get the name. We want to take the name of where this handle change was called. Let's say it was called on our title, for example. The name is going to be title. And so this is kind of cool and slick, is the name is going to be title. And so if we get an event, boom, right here, it's going to say, okay, someone typed in this title text area. It's going to trigger this event. And then we can make the event.target.name, which is going to be the name right here. We want to set that property, for example, title, equal to the value of what's currently in this text area, which we can get by saying e.target.value. And so as long as your names are correct in your text areas and your inputs, this is always going to work, because what's happening is this title is being used as a key right here. And then when this event gets triggered from here, it's resetting the value of the title equal to whatever the value of the text area currently has, which is pretty sick in my opinion. And so whenever a text area changes, we can listen to that onChange event by saying onChange is equal to handle that change by using our generic handler at line 22. We can also call the onChange, and this is why I say generic, is because it can be used for any text area, for example. In this text area, when we get the change, it's going to change the content because it's going to say take content here and set the content property of our state equal to the value that the onChange was coming from. Pretty cool stuff in JavaScript. So we can console.log the article data to see our state changing in real time. Let's go back over to our application. I'm going to inspect. And so NextUI is still in beta, and there's a strange issue with the navbar right now. I would recommend just right-click and hide messages from nextdev.js. Obviously, if you get more errors, they're going to show up. So this should just be a 1. If this is ever like a 2 or a 3, go and check your errors by just clearing it by pressing this X here. But yeah, sorry guys, this is a weird thing with Next.js. Everything works 100% though, which is kind of strange. And so now we can see that our state is getting initialized to just a regular title and content. And as we change the title, for example, hello world, the state gets changed on every single onChange event. So you guys could imagine onChange, 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 onChange. Every single time it's changing and then updating with new content. Same thing goes for article text, and saying onChange, onChange, onChange. It keeps on calling that event over and over, and so our state keeps on getting reset. This is great news though, because now that we have this object, we can go create an actual row in our PostgreSQL table that uses this content to make the title and the content specific to what the user entered, and then also make that article as a specific user. So let's get into doing some PostgreSQL with Supabase. When this button gets called, we can set it to an onPress property is equal to createArticle. CreateArticle is a function that we're about to make, so don't worry about this error. You can go to the top here, and I'm going to put this under all of our state stuff. So we can say const createArticle is equal to an asynchronous function, because we're going to be using some Supabase calls. Define the logic like this, and we can do a try and a catch statement with Supabase. This is just so we catch any errors, just in case anything happens. This catch has an error that gets logged to the console. Because we're in TypeScript, we have to set it to an any property. I'm going to alert error.message. Now the grand finale, our first time using the Supabase client with the PostgreSQL table. We can define the things we are going to receive from the Supabase client by saying const data, error is equal to await Supabase client. And here's what's going to happen is Supabase client, we can chain a bunch of different functions. And so I'm going to press enter and tab in to say that we are chaining all these to the Supabase client right here. The first thing we're going to want to call from Supabase client is dot from the articles table. So from the articles, what do we get? And just in case I'm losing you guys with the chaining here, I'll show you an example. We're actually just doing this. So that's what JavaScript is processing it as, but we're about to have a bunch of different lines. And so I'm going to indent this inwards so we can have the steps show one at a time. From the articles, we want to then dot insert certain information. And so we can pass in this array, and it's going to have one object inside of it. This is where we can pass in all the data that the articles table is expecting for its rows. For example, the title is going to be equal to the article data.title. The content is going to be equal to the article data.content. The user underscore email is going to be equal to the user question mark, because we're not going to assume it exists, just to be safe, dot email question mark again, because we want to make sure we're not going to assume the email exists. And I'm going to do dot to lowercase. This is just so all the user emails inside of our application are lowercase, just to make sure, and also showing you guys how you can manipulate strings before you store them in your database. We also want the user underscore ID to be equal to the user question mark dot ID. And we only want to store a single thing, so we can say dot single at the bottom here. We can then say if error, throw error, which is some nice shorthand syntax from JavaScript. Just to kind of clean up our code on the way out, I'm going to set this article data back to its initial state. I'm not sure this is necessary for this project, but it's just kind of like forward thinking as to, we want to make sure that we set states back to their initial values, because if the person wants to create another article, that old article might still be filled in if the state gets cached, if the browser remembers that state. So this is just setting everything back to empty strings. And because our code is waiting for the Supabase client to get done, once we are done, we can then router.push the user to the main feed to see where their article is, or see their article at the top. At this point, at line 41, the article is actually fully created in our database, so you could even send them to the specific article page if you wanted. All right, guys, I know that was a bunch of content right there, but we actually just made a full insert into our PostgreSQL database using Next.js and TypeScript. So now we can go and pretty much use this, because now if we look at the bottom, when we press the create article, what's going to happen is boom, create article gets hit. We can run to the top. We are then going to have the Supabase client get called. It's going to insert with the title and the content that our user inserted. It's going to insert a single one of those. It's going to reset our state, and then it's going to shove us over to the main feed. So let's go and test this out. I know I said this before, but make sure you're signed in, or else your website obviously won't work, right? Because you won't be a user that's validated. But let's make our title. I'll say subscribe if you made it this far. I know I'm shameless. And then we can make the article text say, thank you so much for watching. And so this is going to send us to the main feed route. Still, the main feed has not been created yet, but when we create this article, it is going to add to that table we made in Supabase. So let's create the article. We get sent to main feed. It's a 404. We got issues, but not really. This is what we were expecting. So let's go and check Supabase out and see what's happening. And so Supabase isn't real time in its dashboard, so you're going to have to press the refresh button at the top left. So if you're like, why isn't anything here? Please refresh the page. It'll help you out. And you guys will see we have a fully inserted and its ID of 1. So you're the first person to ever post, which is pretty cool. And it's going to show you the user's ID, the title, the content, the user's email, and also when this got inserted to our table. Really, really cool stuff. So now that we have articles that users can create, we can actually kind of make a very basic main feed component showing these different articles that are all from this articles table. So let's get started by creating the main feed. So we can go back to our next application, go into pages, and then we're going to create the pages for the main feed. Again, we're going to create that regular index.tsx as we've created many times before now. And so just to make our lives easier again, I'm going to go and copy paste the login component and bring it over to main feed. This is just because we use so many of the different imports from the login component and all of our other components, because we're getting the client and also the user. So it just makes sense to kind of, make our lives easier and copy it over. We're also going to want to import useState from our React application above, and we're going to want to create a state to store all the articles that we're going to get from our actual request to Supabase. So for example, we can say const articles and then set articles is equal to useState, where we're going to make it equal to an array, but because we're using TypeScript, it's going to want us to make it equal to an array of strings like this. So you can say string array. This is necessary for when we set articles after getting data from our actual call to the API or call to the database. And so again, get rid of this if user at line 13. Oh, and my bad, guys. We want to also set this to main feed instead of login. That's my bad. There we go. And so now I just want to import the text property from NextUI, or not property, component. You guys know what I mean. I'm going to wrap our return statement in a fragment, and I'm going to make a very simple just thing to show on top of our main feed to explain what's happening. So text h2 is going to be of mainFeed. I'm then going to make a text here, which size is going to be equal to $large, and the CSS is going to be equal to the margin y with the $8. This means that there's going to be some axis in the y direction of this text that goes under mainFeed, and so it's going to say check out articles from users here. Then we can show all the different articles. Right now, we don't have any, kind of way to show articles in a nice way. And so eventually we are going to create an article card, which is a little card that's going to be used to show the data of a certain article. So before we work on showing the data through these article cards here, let's go and work on the request to Supabase to fill up our articles array. Before we get started, we also want to get the use effect from React, because what's going to happen is useEffect gets ran initially when the page gets ran. And so we can use useEffect to get articles as soon as the page gets ran. For example, useEffect, use an arrow function here to define the logic of the effect. For example, get articles, like this is a function that we are going to define, and we want the dependency array to be nothing. This means the use effect is only ever going to run once, is what this empty array means. If we had variables in here, like ASDF, if the value of ASDF ever changed, that means we're going to run the effect again. So if there's nothing in here, we're never running the effect again. So get articles isn't defined, so it's getting mad at us. So let's do that. I'm going to define get articles by saying const get articles. And again, this is going to be equal to an asynchronous arrow function. And this is because this asynchronous function, and we're using asynchronous because whenever we make Supabase calls, especially the Supabase client, we are using await. And so when we want to use await, we have to make an asynchronous function. I'm going to do some try and catch logic here. So I'm going to say try const data, comma error is equal to await Supabase client, just like we did before. I'm then going to say, okay, dot from articles. So we're looking at the articles table. We want to select all. And so this all is very interesting. The star means I want to select everything. And for this full stack project, I'm going to limit it to the 10 most recent articles. And we aren't doing anything like making pages or anything along those lines. I plan on doing pagination and a bunch of different concepts in other videos. This video already has so much content. And so I just want to make it simple. We're just going to show the most 10 articles at the top of our articles table. As simple as that. We can also console.log data here as well. If you look at the typing of data, it can be in any array or it can be null. And because we're in TypeScript, we have to make sure that if data is not null, that means it's going to be in any array. Then we are going to set the articles with the data that we received. If you guys want to see an example of why TypeScript will yell at you, do this. Any or null is not assignable to this parameter. Pretty much it's saying you cannot assign the string array equal to some null value. So we have to check that it's not null before we actually edit our state. And we can do a similar catch statement at the end here where we're going to take the error, set it to an any type, and then alert error.message. And so this is amazing. This is all we need to get the top 10 rows from our Supabase client. And we're even console.logging the data at line 24 here. So let's go over to the main feed and just run it. Because what's going to happen is as soon as you load the web page, get articles is going to get called, and then it's going to load the 10 most recent articles. So I'm going to npm run dev again. So now we can actually go to main feed here, which is pretty cool. It's going to show us this main feed in here. We can also inspect the console. Within our console, we're going to have an array. This array has one object, and check this out. This object is an actual article that we just entered into our database, which is super legit. So you can show to the user, okay, what's the content of it? You might not want to show the ID. You can show the title. You can show the email of who made it. And so everything you need for the article is in here, which is great. We can take this state, which we now know is kind of structured like this. I'm going to comment this out. It is an array. At each array is an article object. So article object 1, article object 2, etc. Like in forever pretty much, or up until 10 technically. And so what we can do is we can make an article card component, and we can do it like this. Get the article card, which is like a nice way to show all the different data from this object, and make an article property where we can pass in the current object we're on. This allows us to make a cool component that gets information from our request that's kind of getting passed down. So let's get started by building this article card component. I'm now going to go back into the components folder where we made the box and also the navbar component. I'm going to create an article card.tsx. I'm going to import the next page from next. And this is important because we're actually going to use some typing with the next page because we're going to have some props, for example, the article. I'm also going to import use user from at Supabase auth helpers -react. I'm going to import the use router. This allows us to, have a user click on an article and then get sent to that article page, for example. That's going to be from next/router. And then also to create our front-end components, I'm going to import the card and also the text from at nextui.org/react. So we can define the const article card as a next page, and this next page is going to be defined with certain properties, which I'm going to define as props like this. We can access the props by adding them to the parameters to our functional component like this. And in order to pass in props, this is actually a variable name. And so we need to make a TypeScript interface called props. I'm going to say interface props, and I'm going to make an article property. This is kind of a cop-out, but I'm more just showing you guys a simple way of how this would work. For this article property, I'm going to set this equal to any. So article is going to be an object that's going to come in, and we can use this object throughout the article card. Because what's going to happen is if we go back to mainFeed, our component is going to have this, and this article equals is the property I'm talking about. Article equals all that different data we're getting from the database. And so to actually get the article out of the properties, some syntax that's very common in Next.js is to say const curly braces article is equal to props. This allows us to get the article object out of the props object. Might as well do this now. We need to export default article card. Now we can get started with actually creating the component of what this thing is going to look like. So we can say return. We're going to use card from NextUI like this. It's going to be a very simple component, but a couple of things here. We want to make the card is pressable. So that means that the person can hover over it and their mouse is going to be able to click on it, for example, because we want them to click on it and then go to an article. I'm also going to set some CSS properties, mainly just the margin bottom is going to be equal to $10. So there's a little bit of margin on the bottom of the card. So there's space in between different cards. I also want it so when we press on a certain article on the on press, we are then going to be sent to the article page that holds the content of that article. So before we do this, in order to use the router, we have to initialize the router above. So we can say const router is equal to use router. Now we have the router from Next that allows us to kind of push the user to different routes. For example, router.push/article, and we can use a question mark, which is a parameter at the end. ID is equal to plus article.id. And we are going to be working with the article route soon, so don't be too worried if you guys don't understand this. I'm going to explain this in great detail later. Now in the body of the card, we can show card.body. We can show the title of the article by saying text h2 with then the article.title. We can then say text, which is bold, posted, and we can even make a date here, for example, because in the article, we have access to the inserted at. Inserted_at is actually a date string, and it's kind of a generic type date string. You can even do like console.log inserted_at if you guys are curious about that. We can make a function to transfer what inserted_at is into something that the user can understand. And it's relatively simple. We can say function get date. And so we can format the date like date, month, year, something like that. And so how do we do that? We can let the current time be equal to the date.parse. So this is using the date object in JavaScript. And we can take the article.inserted_at. We can then create a date object with this current time. And so this date.parse is going to give us a number of milliseconds. And this is some like date thing that was created a long time ago that everyone references was midnight, January 1st, 1970. But now we can actually process this strange number into something we can use by saying let date is equal to new date. Then we can pass in that number of milliseconds into the constructor. This new date is smart enough to now know what the actual date is from that milliseconds number. And so we can return a string to our user by saying return date.getDay, for example, and we can add a dash here, date.getMonth, and we can add a dash here again, and then date.getFullYear. And so you can imagine it's going to be formatted just like I had it here. And so within our text, we can call things, for example, functions by using curly braces and then going like get date. And then this get date here is going to eventually be returned, and this get date here is eventually going to be replaced by the string that gets returned on line 20. I know that's a lot of work just for the date, but hopefully that's valuable for you guys, especially if you want to make something more complicated. Is this date object up here has a bunch of different things. For example, the hours, milliseconds, minutes, seconds, whatever you guys want. And so it allows you to make those kind of social media like dates that you've seen, like when someone's posted like 3 minutes ago, if you want to do something like that. But for now, we're just keeping it nice and simple. Going to create another final text here, which is going to be equal to by, so we can show who is the owner of the article. I'm going to say article.user_email. I think we did 2 lowercase before, but just to triple check, I'm going to do another .2 lowercase here. And boom, now we have a full article card we can use. So if we go back over to our main feed, we can create a bunch of different article cards with the information we get from this articles array in our state. And so our articles, just to show you guys, articles is going to be equal to something that looks like this. And because it's an array, we can map over the articles. And so we can say articles.map, take the current article we're on, and then say article card like this, and then say that the article is equal to article, the one that we're currently mapping over. And article card is not defined yet, and so we can go to the top of our application here and say import article card. We can import article card from .. It means we're going 2 folders out, go into components, and then grab the article card. Oh, and my bad guys, because we're mapping over this article, these curly braces generally mean that we're going to have JavaScript inside to show a bunch of different logic and eventually do something like return a certain component. If we're just directly returning the component, we want these to just be parentheses like that. That means in the parentheses is our return statement, and then we're going to show the article card right here. So now let's take another look at our front end. My bad guys, that's a dumb mistake, but hopefully you guys saw that. Inside of our article card, this date.getFullYear does not have parentheses at the end, so we can actually just add that here. It's funny though, I believe it was showing the actual logic inside of getFullYear and added it to our string. So just in case you wanted to know that. But save your article card after fixing that, because these are methods that you're calling to get certain information out of the date. And now let's go back to our front end. And so as you guys can see, we have the full article card showing for the only article on our website. If we click on it, we're going to be sent to an article with an ID of 1, and this page doesn't exist. Let's go and create the page that allows you to see data for a certain article. For example, /article, ID = 1. We can get started by going into pages and creating a folder for the article route itself. So just article like this. We can make an index.tsx inside of article. And then again, as I've always done, we're going to go over to login, Control-A, copy all of login, and bring it over into article. Change the name of it to article like such. And so because we are using parameters in our request, for example, localhost 3000/article ? Which means start of our parameters, ID is equal to 1, we need to do something called router.query. That allows us to get these variables from here. And again, we can delete this if statement. Because we already have access to the router, we can get the ID out of the router by saying const ID is equal to router.query like this. This allows us to access that variable right here. I'm also going to import the use state from React because we are going to use a state to hold the actual article data that we are going to get. So we can define a state by going down here and saying const article, set article is equal to use state. I'm just going to make it an empty object, and I'm going to define this state with the type of any. It's just because Supabase gets strange when you try to set data equal to states, and so this any allows us to kind of avoid that, especially when we know the article we're receiving. And so we can make a use effect here. You can say use effect, which again, go to your top here and make sure you import use effect. VS Code did it for me automatically, but you can do that here. It's going to be equal to an arrow function, which is the logic of our effect. And interestingly enough, I'm going to make the dependencies show the ID. And so I want this effect to run whenever ID changes, because with Next.js, ID is going to be undefined for a little period of time. In order to avoid running our get article code or trying to talk to our database with no valid ID, I can say if type of ID doesn't equal undefined. Is a cool way to kind of get around this error and reduce redundant calls to your API. Then we can get the article, which is a function you're going to define. Just to explain this logic, what might happen is our useEffect is going to get ran initially, and ID is going to be undefined. When the value of ID changes, because it's in our dependency array, then useEffect is going to get ran again. And so that's why we have this if condition right here. Now let's get started on creating this asynchronous function to get the article data. So async function get article. I can say const data, comma error equal to await Supabase client dot from. We are going to the articles table again. And so you could imagine if you're using different tables, you can change this dot from here and you can communicate with any table inside your Supabase client. We are only messing with the articles for this video. So just to explain that real quick, I'm then going to dot select all the different articles. But importantly, after I select all the articles, I'm then going to say, okay, I actually just want the article where it passes the filter of the ID is equal to this ID that we passed in to the link, like right here. If it passes that filter, I want to get the dot single out of that. So the single piece of data from that. We can then do some different type of error handling by saying if error console.log error, just to show you guys that there are different ways to handle this stuff than just try and catch. Else, if there's no error, I'm then going to set the article with the data we get passed from Supabase. And that's all we need to do. So now we can get started by creating some of the front-end components. For example, on the top, I'm going to import text, the spacer, the user, and also button from at NextUI/React. And so we can make a pretty simple front end. I'm going to wrap everything within a React fragment. I'm going to make some text at the top, which is going to show the article.title. I'm then going to make a little spacer. This allows us to get space in the y-axis. We used it a while ago in the video, but I'm just going to make a little bit of different space here using the 0.5. I'm then going to use the user component, which is something we get access to from NextUI. You can even do like profile pictures and stuff for the user as well, but for this video, not going to be really using any of that. But this will allow us to show the name of the person who created the article. So for example, not the current user logged in, instead the person who made the article. So we can go into article.user_email, and I'll do a question mark here just in case it doesn't exist, .to lowercase. I'm then going to set the size equal to medium. So this is the size of our little user component. And I'm going to copy this spacer over and make some space under that, make it like a 1 in this case. Now we can actually show the text of the article content. Now we can actually make a little text element. Its size is going to be equals to the $large. And this is going to show the article.content. Amazing. So when we go to this route, we should be getting a certain ID. As soon as the ID isn't undefined, we're going to get the article, set this article data to our state here. Once this state gets set, we can roll all the way down, and then we're going to show all the different variables within our state here. So let's go and see if this works. So we can start by going to the main feed, and we can also just click on this, and you guys will see we are re-requesting the data at this article link, and we are showing all the different data here, which is pretty neat. And so this is a lot of functionality we've built so far. We have the main feed, it's going to show all of our articles. We have authentication, and we have the ability to show information for certain different articles. Now we want to get into editing and deleting articles. We want users to be able to edit and delete articles when they are the owner of a specific article. And so what we can do is let's go over to this article page in our code. We can go down here, and first of all, we're going to say if the user exists at all, and the article.user_ID is equal to the user.id within our application. If that's true, this means that the current user logged in is the owner of this article. If that's not true, we just want to show null. We don't want to show any like buttons, for example. But if they do own the article, we want to show some buttons that will allow the user to edit the article and delete the article. I'm going to bring in a spacer just so we have some space between the buttons and the text. I'm then going to create a button of size small. It's going to be called edit. So if you want to edit the article, then I can copy this like here, make some other ones, and now I want to make another button called delete. And we can set this color equal to error is something that NextUI gives us access to. So let's go to our front end and see what this looks like. Amazing. So because we are the owner of this certain article, it's showing the edit and delete buttons, which is amazing. And so edit article is actually going to go and like, I'll just make this comment. You guys don't have to write this down as well. It's just for teaching's sake. This edit is actually going to send us to something like localhost 3000/edit article. So as you guys may have guessed, we have to then create an edit article page, but delete is a little bit easier. We don't have to send the user to a delete article page. So instead I can just say on press is equal to an arrow function here, and then I'm going to make a delete article function above. So we can copy this name delete article, go above. I'm going to say const delete article is equal to an asynchronous function because we're about to do a deletion using Supabase. It's going to be a very simple try and catch where I'm going to try getting the data and also the error out of Supabase by saying equals await Supabase client dot from. What table are we looking at? We're going to use the articles table dot delete, which is very simple. Delete just like, okay, I want to delete something. And then, so what is the filter based on what we want to delete? Well, we can do in dot equals where the ID is equal to the ID that we currently have in the route. And this ID is currently equal to the ID that is passed in the URL. For example, the ID equals 1. And Supabase is so cool because it does all that authentication of if the user actually owns this article in the backend. If you guys remember when we actually created the row level security, it helps us out so much there. So we don't have to even do any validation with its deletes because Supabase does that for us. If there's an error that somehow doesn't get caught, I'm going to throw error here. And once we get here, I'm going to router.push the user to the main feed. We don't want them to stay on the page of an article that doesn't exist. That's kind of confusing, right? So I'm just going to push them back to the main feed where they'll see that, that article's gone. I'm also going to just finish up this catch statement, going to get an error set to the any type, and I'm going to alert that error.message. And so this will allow us to fully delete an article, which is pretty legit. Let's go and delete this amazing article we've made so far. All right, so what we're expecting to happen is you press the delete button and it's going to send us to the main feed where we are going to see no articles. All right, it's a sad day, but the one article on our website is now gone. So kind of sad, but let's create another article just to see that everything's still working and also just to see that we have something to edit as we create the edit article content. So I'm going to say title here. Title's going to be, you better subscribe if you made it this far. I'm just messing with you guys. You don't actually have to subscribe, but I just like to be fun with the titles and the texts. Just kidding. Thanks for watching. And I'm going to create the article here. Amazing. So we're back and we still own this article because we are CooperCodes2 at Gmail. So now we can go in. Amazing. So we can see that we still get access to this edit and the delete. Just for teaching's sake, I'm actually going to go to the main feed and I'm going to sign out. Signing out, send this back to the main page. So if I go to main feed again, and if I click on this, I'm not able to see those edit or delete buttons. So that's really great news. Just to show you guys that's working, I'm going to log in as CooperCodes2 again. All right, we are back and logged in. Now let's get started on creating the edit functionality for our website. So I'm going to create a page and I'm going to call it edit article. Inside of edit article, I'm going to make an index.tsx. And I'm going to tell you guys a trade secret. If you made it this far in the video, you're about to get a trade secret directly from CooperCodes, the industry expert. Just kidding. We are going to copy all of createArticle because createArticle is going to be very similar to editArticle. We want to have the same inputs. We want to have the same state. We want to do a lot of things the same pretty much. And so we can go in, copy all this different stuff from createArticle and paste it into editArticle. Go and change the name equal to editArticle, and we can get rid of this comment. We don't need it. Then we can also bring editArticle. Make sure you export editArticle as well, or else you're going to get an error. And so for this site, we're actually going to have a localhost 3000/editArticle, and it's going to have that same question mark ID logic. So it's going to have the same question mark ID equals 1, for example. And we can actually reuse some of our code. If this wasn't a tutorial, I didn't want to make things kind of go faster, you might want to make some reusable functions that you can use in some type of utility folder or components folder. But for this project, I'm just going to go and pretty much copy the same logic we used to load in the article. Because when we edit the article, we don't want to start with an empty title and content. We instead want to start with the article's title and content. So this initial state, a line 17, is kind of not right. It's kind of incorrect. If we want to load the actual value of an article and it has ID of 1, where have we already written that logic? Well, we've already written it in the article page. So go over to the article page, bang, bang, right here. And we are going to copy this use effect from article. So go to article and get the entire use effect like this. And again, guys, don't worry about these errors. We're going to get them done one at a time. Initially, we want to import use effect. So we can go to the top and import use effect from React. We also want to define ID, which we can do by saying const ID is equal to router.query, exactly like we did before. And we also need to set the article data. The funny thing here is the data object we're expecting from this article is the exact same. We want to set article data of an article. And so even though in our other use effect it was set article, we can say set article data here. And so what's happening is this. Like, I know it's kind of a lot of stuff, so let me explain to you guys. We are creating an initial state with a title of this and a content of this, and it's going to have article data is equal to initial state. We are actually going to overwrite this state with the entire value of the article data. The important thing is this article data is going to have everything. It's going to have the user ID, it's going to have the email, it's going to have when it was inserted. The important thing is that it still has the title and it still has the content property. And so when we handle these changes, you can imagine it's going to look just like our initial state, except with way more variables. But when the title changes in our actual text boxes, it's going to edit those things there. It's going to edit the state like that. And then when the content changes, it's similarly going to get edited when we do this handle change here. And so that's just to give you guys an idea of what's happening and kind of why it's happening. If you wanted to, you could take the title and the content out of this and manually, make it look like the exact same structure, but I kind of found it unnecessary for this project. And it's also nice because this article data has a lot more variables than just title and content. It has everything you need for the actual article data. Hopefully that's clear enough. So on the very bottom of this component, we are going to, instead of saying create article, I want to say update article like this. Instead of create article, I want to say edit article. So we can go and copy this edit article here. And instead of posting as, we can say editing as a certain user. And so we can take this edit article here and bring it up to the top. And I'm going to copy in this edit article to this create article you guys already should have here. And so we are going to have the try statement look incredibly similar, but instead we are going to update instead of insert. So it's the same thing, const data error, await Supabase client, look at the articles, and now we want to do a .update. And we want to tell it which certain properties do we want to update. We don't need to update the user underscore ID. That's not changing. And even if it were, we wouldn't change it here. User email, that's also not changing. But the title and the content are the two things that the user is going to change. And just so you guys understand this isn't fully done yet. This update is a very generic thing. And so we need to tell it specifically what to update. Saying .single here makes no sense. It has no filters. It has no way of knowing which row to look at. We want to specifically update the row that has an ID equal to the ID passed in our query. I'm also just not going to do this set article data here. And instead, I'm going to push the user back to the article, ID, to the current ID they're on, so they can directly see their changes that they just made, for example. I know this is a bunch of code, so I'm going to explain everything one at a time. We are getting the ID out of the edit article link because it's going to look just like this. Edit article, ID is equal to 1. We then have an initial state that gets set, so our article data is initially this object. This function is to handle the changes to this object, like I've discussed earlier in the video. And then initially, this use effect is going to get ran. Eventually, the ID is not going to be undefined, it's going to get fully loaded, and it's going to be equal to like 1, for example. We're then going to get the article that is the data equal to the ID of 1. So we're getting that ID 1 article data. Once we get that article data, we are setting our state equal to the data of that article. And then as soon as we edit the article, we are going to show the title and the content of the new stuff that the user inputted. The final cherry on top to this edit article is that when this article data gets here, we want to show the text content with that title and the content loaded in. If you were to edit an article, would you expect the text inputs to be completely blank and you have to remake your article from scratch? Probably not. So what we can do is we can go down to our text areas and we can set the initial value equal to article data.title, for example. Same with this text area. We can set the initial value equal to article data.content. So now when we load in this page, it's going to show us the content of the article and also the title of the article that we already had. So our edit article is pretty much fleshed out. Great stuff, guys. One final thing we need to do is we can take a look at this link right here at line 8. We need to go into the article right here. and forward the user when they press on edit. For example, on press is equal to a function. Then we are going to router.push the user over to something that looks like this. So you can just say /edit article and ID is equal to the ID that's currently in this article page. Amazing. So let's go and check out the edit article on our front end. So we are at an article that we currently wrote, or we wrote a while ago, and we are coopercodes2 at Gmail. We can press edit here, and you guys will see it loads in the content that we already have, which is amazing, and we can add to it. For example, this is the end of the tutorial. Thanks so much for spending the time to finish the project. Any issues? We have this stuff on GitHub, so go check that GitHub link out. Hopefully this has been educative and informative when it comes to using all the different technologies in this video. So we can update the article here, and boom, we can see that we now have this fully updated article with the new data. And we can even refresh the page. Let's just show you guys I'm not tricking you or anything. Refresh the page over and over, and it's gonna get us that new data over and over. Like I said before, guys, this is the end of the video, and I just want to say thanks so much for watching. Hopefully this has been super informative for, building up those full stack fundamental skills. I know for some of you guys this is a relatively simple project and you're like, where's the pagination, where's like the search by community, where's these different things. I have videos coming in the future that are going to be super more complex, and hopefully some really valuable and interesting full stack projects that will assist you guys, whether it's work, your own personal projects, getting an internship, or anything like that. I do have a link in the bio that's like a newsletter I'm planning on doing, and it's going to have links to like my courses as I plan to release those, and also just like coupons, and even just like I'm planning on like releasing free stuff as well. And so if you found the content valuable, feel free to sign up for the newsletter. I'll never spam you. I know everyone says that, but I'm a chill guy. I literally will only hit you up if it seems like, I'm releasing something that's pretty awesome. All right, guys, seriously, thanks so much for watching, and have a good rest of your day.